Hey folks, JD Payne here. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with Matthew Ellison and Denny Spitters and talk about their recent book, The Sending Shepherd. This book is an exciting glimpse into a survey that they conducted among pastors within the U.S., thinking about pastoral attitudes, actions, and ways that pastors are leading their churches to the nations. I want you to check out this conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it. I'm JD Payne. Welcome, folks, to this time that I have with a couple of friends of mine. And if you have listened to any of my podcasts over the years, you've read any of my stuff, you know that I have mentioned the name Denny Spitters. I've mentioned the name Matthew Ellison quite a few times over the years. And it is a delight to have them on the show today. I am talking with them about their new book, The Sending Shepherd. And this just came out last fall, just a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken. And we're going to have a conversation about this today. In fact, I think you guys were on my Strike the Match podcast a few years ago when one of your other books came out. I don't remember if it was I think it may have been When Everything Was Missions, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right.
That may have been it. So I'm looking forward to us having this conversation, Dave. But I'm sure that there are some folks. They're unfamiliar with who is Matthew and who's Denny. And so maybe Matthew, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get into the book in just a moment.
Yeah, Matthew Ellison. I'm the president at 1615. Our ministry celebrated 21 years of ministry last year.
Wow, that's
so really exciting to see what God's doing. I was 10 years as a missions pastor at a local church. We went through what I would call a missions renaissance or renewal. We went from a reactive approach to missions to a proactive approach. Went from just supporting missions to actively engaging the gifts and the talents and the passions of our people. And as we went through this missions awakening, I started to receive requests from other churches, and they said, what are you doing? And so what I discovered was the Holy Spirit was moving in the hearts of many churches who were not content just to give money. They didn't want to do missions by proxy. And so that's how 1615 got started. We saw something God was doing in the church, and we're a missions coaching organization. We come alongside local churches. We help them to clarify their global mission, and then we draw a vision out of them. We don't put it in, we draw it out. So we want them to have an endemic vision that they can call their own that really accounts for their unique gifts, talents, and passions as a local body of believers. We connect them to agencies, unreached people groups, and so that's the story.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but to me, you guys seem to be almost like a boutique kind of agency. You're doing something very unique that I do not see a large number of other organizations out there doing. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're in the middle space between what you would call mission agencies and orgs and churches. We're churchmen at heart.
Right.
Yep.
That's where our passion is. We're pastors. We've served in and are serving in roles like that in our churches. And we just love the opportunity to both. Our primary vision is to coach. So it's less about consulting and more about coaching. Yeah. And so we coach agencies about churches, and we coach churches on how to engage better with the Great Commission.
That's fantastic. So tell us, heard a little bit about who Matthew is. Who's Denny? Tell us.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm an old guy.
Now.
So I've been around for a while. My attest to that, my wife of 54 years this year.
Wow.
And
that's great.
God has blessed us immensely. The background is background in the church that has been in missions, that has also been as a missions pastor, an elder, and also, worship, small groups, discipleship, all those roles over time. I've been in business for 15 years at a point in time as well. So involved in the church, involved in parachurch, involved for 18 years at Pioneers, serving as their vice president of church partnerships, and was seconded to 1615 about 3 years ago, and have started with them full-time in January of this year. So I'm the newbie on the team.
How about that?
Yeah, newbie. We've been doing this together for 15 years. It's just formal now.
It's just been more formalized.
It's more formal.
That's true. So this is your all's third book that you've collaborated on.
Yes.
Because so the first one was When Everything is Missions.
Correct.
But then you edited together a work of conversations on when everything is missions, and then this one's different. It's not out of left field different, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's not based on so much those first two books, the Sending Shepherd, leading churches to disciple all nations. It starts with this survey that was a Barna Commission survey. Could one of you guys kind of speak on that? Like what was that survey about? What was the whole genesis behind that?
Yeah, well, we've both been involved in missions mobilization for quite a while, combined 70 years. So we've been at this for a while with a focus on local churches. And we've had a lot of conversations that if the senior pastor's not engaging, it's really tough to mobilize a congregation. Yes. Yeah. In fact, there's a quote from John R. Mott that he wrote 120 years ago in a book titled The Pastor in Modern Missions. You're familiar with that book? Yes. And he says the secret of the home church pressing her advantage in the non-Christian world is one of leadership. Mm-hmm. That was true then. It is also true today. Mm-hmm. And so as we talked about this, we said, is there a place for a book that addresses the importance of pastors really leading the way when it comes to mobilizing their people into God's mission? And we looked around, and it's interesting. We found the Mott book, 120 years old, and we thought, we need a new treatment of this. Although that book is excellent, by the way. It's as relevant today as it was when it was written. Some of the language is dated, but...
Sure, yeah.
And then we said, but let's just not make this anecdotal. Let's actually do a survey and find out how pastors view missions, what their perceptions are, what their attitudes are. And so the book is really rooted in the voices of pastors. It's not a... outside diagnostic, it's a diagnostic from the inside out. So Barna surveyed 427 pastors, and they believe that number is representative of, by and large, the church in America. So the answers reflect the perspective of U.S. pastors and about missions.
Yeah. So you really are getting into things that are really happening kind of at this moment in time with this survey. Yes. That I think is not just a snapshot here and now, but it's building on a culture and a tradition that's brought us up to this point in time. I remember when you guys, before this even came into print, and you guys sent me a draft copy that I was able to read through. My first concern was. These guys are going to take out the stick and try to guilt pastors. You bad pastor, you're doing something wrong. And so I know you guys, so I wasn't like holding my breath the whole time, but it was kind of like, I wonder. But then when I read it wasn't so much this notion of there's no sense of guilting. Is that even a word? Guilting.
Good.
Yeah, but it's more of let's recognize some of the realities and let's acknowledge them. And so you try to bring the facts to life and show what is there that's good and healthy and right and biblical that can continue to be built upon. But then you guys are being honest, and it is a transparent look at some of the things that maybe it doesn't make us feel very comfortable.
That's true.
And we've tried to show not just what some of the dilemmas are, but also what some of the strengths are in the church, what it reveals, and what are the opportunities. And that's a positive thing, even in light of some difficult data that comes out of it.
Yeah, I want to mention something here I think it's worth noting. When the data was finally surfacing in 2022, it was on the coattails of something called COVID-19, if you remember that.
Yeah, I think I remember. We had something like that.
Yeah. And so, we weren't too surprised. Some of the data was challenging. It was, it surfaced points of frustration and pain points. And we had been working on a manuscript together, and it just felt a little harsh, to be honest with you, JD. It felt too strong. And I remember sending it to someone, a handful of people, you being one of them as well, and they just said, there's a rough edge that you've got to take off. You really got to take off that tone. And it wasn't, that wasn't our heart, but we were just building on the data that was there. And so when I look at the release time of the book, it would have been premature to release it after COVID, because I think people weren't thinking about these things. I mean, they were just, and they hadn't been in their building for months and months. Many churches, maybe not in Alabama. You guys continued to meet, didn't you?
No, we did a lot of the Zoom things as well.
All right.
There was a lot of tension during that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, but yeah. So it was kind of this roller coaster of Zoom in present.
But a lot of churches hadn't met for a long time, and then we're going to release this book about the sending shepherd or the pastor's role in missions. So it was delayed circumstantially, and that extra window of time gave us the opportunity to rewrite it, and to write it with just a love for pastors, an esteem for pastors, and how do we expose these realities that are challenging, but in a really gracious way. So even the timing, we see God's fingerprints on when it got released.
Yeah. Yep. Let's talk a little bit about some of those challenges that you guys see in the survey results that come back. One of the things is kind of this disconnect between pastors, and this is the good thing, the pastors who have the desire to reach the nations. They want to see the Great Commission fulfilled. But there's almost like this disconnect. There's something that's not connecting with the reality issues. And Denny, I heard you say one time there's a stewardship issue at stake here in bringing these together. Can you guys kind of comment on maybe some of those things that you see in your results or your survey results, both the good and the things that are not so positive?
Sure. I think on one hand, 98% of pastors say that the Great Commission is mostly a global mandate. That's, in a way, it's surprising that it's that strong because you see some deficiencies and you wonder if that's really true. And 92% say that they are passionate, 94 actually, about the Great Commission. We're passionate about seeing the Great Commission done. But then as we ask clarifying questions in the book, part of the clarification is looking at the other parts of the data that say most of the preaching that's done is focused, and teaching is focused on missional living, and very little of it has anything to do with cross-cultural missions, cross-cultural sending. In fact, about 50% say they rarely or never preach on some of those things.
Wow. How about that? Why do you think that is the case? There's that passion, for the Great Commission, but yet, I mean, because that's the most prominent place in a pastor's ministry, where the congregation is there and the opportunity to teach, but yet it's not happening. Why? I guess the ultimate question is why the disconnect? What are you guys seeing in all this?
I think another thing that's important to surface that relates to this is that 50% of pastors, I think it's 49 or 50, I can't remember exactly, it's close, they teach that everyone is a missionary. They have a conviction that everyone's a missionary. So in one sense, you want to lean into that 98 who believe the Great Commission is a biblical mandate. But when you think about how they really define it, what you find out that it's not cross-cultural. So I think this is about not a rejection of missions or the Great Commission, but it's a redefinition of missions. So they're saying, yes, we're passionate about the Great Commission. We believe it's a biblical mandate, but we hardly ever talk about cross-cultural missions or reaching the people of other faiths because they believe everything is missions. So I think one of the things that really came out strongly was a need for a biblical shared definition of missions among leadership.
What do you think has influenced this redefining of the Great Commission? I mean, what's and I know there's a whole history that's there, but are there things that immediately come to mind? Why are half the pastors saying everyone's a missionary and the other half are saying no, not everyone's a missionary? I mean, that's a pretty significant divide. What has brought us to this point?
I think that a lot of it has to do with pastors wanting to introduce missional language to see evangelism happen in their church. So they've equated missions specifically with evangelism alone.
I see.
And I think also that in discipleship, missions has been kind of divorced from the whole issue of what does it mean to disciple members in their church. So the focus has been primarily, if you see the things that pastors are excited about and regularly teach on, it's missional living. It's how to live a missional life. Now, we don't believe in any way that's evil or that's bad. Not at all. However, this missional language has kind of really glossed over and separated the Great Commission and the other commissioning statements of Christ and the commands of the church and the primary core mission of the church from discipling believers in the context of the U.S. church.
Yeah. Wow. I think, too, as America increasingly becomes post-Christian, what is required to do evangelism in our context is a mission-like advance of the gospel. We need to contextualize in ways we haven't in the past. Right. And so we had the introduction of the whole missional movement because of that. Let's get out of the church. Right. Let's get into the highways and the byways. Let's be salt and light. Let's share the gospel. Again,
all good things.
A really positive thing. Yeah. But what also accompanied this missional language is everyone's a missionary. And when everyone's a missionary, the priority of taking the gospel cross-culturally, especially among the unreached, gets obscured or forgotten. So we loved a lot of the good things that came out of the missional movement, but I think this idea that everyone's a missionary was a downside. It was a well-intentioned idea, but it had unintended consequences. And so I think the shifting towards post-Christianism here is also a piece of this.
Other things that you saw in the book, strengths, and that also revealed a concern. What else came out in the surveys?
I would say that one of the strengths that came out was 82% of pastors say that they have decision-making authority in missions in their church. Now, they were asked to choose all that apply. Right. But 82% was amazing. They chose other things. I work with a congregation. I work with a missions team. So there were multiples, but that was overwhelming. The biggest, kind of reveal that says, in a positive way and in a good way, that pastors have the authority to shape missions in their church, to shape the teaching, to shape the preaching, to shape the vision and strategy of where they're headed. So I think that that's a positive thing, and yet at the same time we say, well, if they have that authority, maybe why aren't they using it? Or what is the barrier that's keeping them from using it? Yeah. So that was a very encouraging sign. And we're trying to call pastors to say, well, if you've got the authority, we want to see you engage in bringing the local and the global together, not this dichotomy of there's local and then global missions, but see you bring all of ministry, even local mission, into the global narrative of the gospel and seeing that happen. I think of a phrase that was used, I'm trying to remember who it was that gave it. He said when it comes to missions in the...
George Murray,
there we go. Yeah. When it comes to missions in the church, the pastor holds the key or he holds the padlock. And I think that's got some truth to it.
It does. It really does. So when I put your book down, my thought was that there's a culture, there's an atmospheric change that needs to happen. And it's clearly not going to happen overnight. We did not get here overnight. It's not going to change in the next few days. So kind of moving forward, what change or changes do you hope to inspire in the life of the reader, in the life of churches, in the life of the local church leader? What are the desires that you have that come out of this work?
Yeah. There's a whole section of case studies in the book. These are churches that 1615 has coached over the years. And these are churches that went through a process of really understanding the role of the local church in world evangelization, the role of the agency, what does it look like to build a strategy, all those pieces. And they're really beautiful stories of the journeys that these churches went through. And I think what you see is as they integrated missions into the life and the culture of their churches, the churches became more spiritually vibrant. One of the things we say in the book is that missions is not only necessary for the life of the world, it's necessary for the life of the church. And I believe the shepherds who are listening to this, pastors who, they tend the flock in the name of Jesus, they care about the spiritual welfare and the vitality of those God has called them to lead. And if they want them to be truly healthy, then you can't take something that is central to God and marginalize it. So what we talk about is an Acts 13 season, JD. Every church needs an Acts 13 season. And I'm talking about the church in Antioch of Syria. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit spoke to them and sent them to the Gentiles. We know that this is where the world missions movement begins in earnest. That one of the greatest missionary breakthroughs in the history of the world got its start there. And we say, you need an Acts 13 season. What would it look like if leaders in your church came together and they set aside several months and they said, God, we're seeking you about your will for our church when it comes to reaching the nations. Evaluating what they're doing could be very powerful. And there's some insights in the book about what that season might look like.
When I read this, one of the first things that really caught my attention was the survey. I mean, which is the obvious thing. But the reason it caught my attention is because as of this time, I do not know of any survey like this that has been done on this scale and has been the results have been released. If there's something else that's out there, I am unaware of it. So when I saw this, the social scientist in me, the missiologist in me said, this is fascinating. And so this is mainly for pastors and church leaders that are listening to this or watching this right now. I want you to understand that these guys write this book with an understanding of you are taxed as a leader, that you have so many other things on your plate, and I know from 19 years in pastoral ministry, and these guys have been in pastoral ministry as well, it's easy to shift into a maintenance mode, a maintenance mentality. This book and these brothers, they don't produce this to provide pastors with a guilt trip, as I mentioned at the start of our time together, but really they really try to extend a helping hand for the journey, and they really try to reach out. They love pastors, they love the local church, and they want to say, how can we assist in this journey? And so I want to encourage you. The title is Ascending Shepherd. I'm assuming, now maybe I'm assuming wrong, that the primary reader is to be the local church pastor, but I don't know. Am I wrong on that? I mean, the audience.
I think I'll give you a little corrective to it.
Please.
I think it's primarily towards the local church pastor, but if you are a mobilizer, you are a member of a church that really is passionate about missions, we don't want you to take this book and hurry up and go put it, once you read it yourself, and know what you're reading and understand it well, and then carefully discern whether you should forward that. In fact, we have a whole chapter in there that really is kind of focused on something that we call the holy annoyer in church, that is really passionate about missions and is in the pastor's face like every other week, kind of like, when are you going to get on board? And so we have a word to them about posture, service, decorum, how to support and really influence your pastor in a way that is a support base, not a confrontation. And I think that's the heart in this book. Like you said, we don't want to do a pastor beat down. There's too many expectations as it is. But I like what you had to say by saying, instead of maintenance, just continuing to maintain everything, there needs to be a reawakening of the mission of God in the Church of God in North America. We need that desperately.
There's an idea that I've been noodling on for quite some time, even when we were writing the book. Gracious disruption. That's what I hope happens. We need disruption in this space, JD. We've marginalized the mission of God. 50% of pastors rarely or never teach on missions. That's problematic. Now, there's some positive pieces too, but we need some disruption in this space, but we want it to be gracious. I think that the book has a prophetic edge to pastors because they do lead the church. And what they value, their congregations will value, but we're sensitive to the fact that this is one of the toughest callings in the world. Yeah. And so we want to be really sensitive. Again, we both have a pastoral background. The last thing we want to do is weaponize the data. One of the things we say is the data, the diagnostic, it's not meant to shame. It's just meant to show what's actually going on and how do we move forward. So I would say if you care about the health and the well-being of your flock, I would encourage you to read the book.
Yeah, I think that's a good word, and I would echo that for those of you that are watching and listening. I think that these brothers have really struck a note on something that is incredibly relevant, and they're doing it in, I think, a very pastoral way in working with church leaders to recognize or diagnose, as Matthew mentioned, the realities that are out there. And so I don't think you're going to come away with this book feeling guilty. I don't think you're going to come away from this book feeling beat down and discouraged. I will say they don't pull punches. Where the data goes, that's where they go. And so I would say it's an encouraging book, but at the same time, it's an honest book, and it's a book that should challenge us. I recently posted a blog on 9 things that if I had to go back and do it all over again in my early pastoral ministry in relation to missions in the local church, what are 9 things that I should have done? And I think for pastors and church leaders that are out there, I think reading this book, I think it will help you in your journey to think about, okay, where are we right now? Where are we moving in a very healthy biblical direction in light of God's global realities that are out there and where the nations are? And then where are some things that we may need to make some course adjustments on in the process? My guests today have been Denny Spitters and Matthew Ellison. The book is The Sending Shepherd, Leading Churches to Disciple All Nations. And if you haven't had a chance to get a copy of it, I hope that you do. I hope that you check out 1615 online. They have a fantastic resource that lives out there. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at their website, let me encourage you to do so. Brothers, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, blessings.
Thank you.